Sarah. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Oh, thank you for
Um,
having me. I'm excited to get to talk to you.
yeah. So I think kind of one of the first things I want to hit kind of right out the gate, as we're coming into early
Mhm.
2025, there's a lot of hype
Mhm.
around AI.
Yeah, of course.
And I think one of the things that I know we've like talked about offline quite a bit is just like the importance of reminding people to keep the human elements of what they're doing when it comes to creativity.
Yeah.
So I kind of just to start, like, what are some of your thoughts
Yeah,
on?
absolutely. I think about it a lot actually because just like everyone, we're just being bombarded with it on all sides, whether we're on our phones or just reading the newspaper, it's everywhere. And I think just emphasizing like it is a tool. There are things that AI can do and it can do it faster than you can do it, but there are things that you can do that AI can never do. And I think if you can just sort of find a place if you want to use it where AI is helpful to you that maybe makes certain things that you do in your life a little more efficient, you're a little more optimized. But then those areas in which you can actually make a difference in your output, like actually create something, do something new, grab attention in a way that is sticky and that helps you connect to other people, like just set it aside. Because what we find, and a study came out, I think just a few months ago, that showed that people who were using AI or open AI to help them generate ideas,
Yeah,
that they felt like the ideas they were coming up with were more creative than what they would have come up with on their own. But what the study
interesting.
actually showed is that they were less creative, that the ideas were less creative. So just a reminder, like it feels good to suddenly like consult AI and have like a list of ideas come back at you. You're like, oh, I have these great ideas. I can just run with one of these.
Yeah,
And like you can, but you've just cut off that opportunity to come up with something original. And I think that if you can look for those areas in which you can develop more original ideas, like it is worth it in the long run to do that.
that's amazing. You're actually like hitting on something that I was excited to be able to talk with
Yeah.
you about. I read this article a while ago that was talking about how people are using programs like
Hmm.
ChatGPT and Claude and all these other AI programs to do their proofreading.
Yes.
But what people are actually finding is your ability to be creative and to hit on these, higher levels of like proofreading and
Hmm.
whatnot, they start to diminish very
Decline. Yeah.
quickly.
Yeah.
And like your ability to actually come up with a creative idea is in going through and finding your
Yeah,
mistakes.
that's right.
And
Yeah, it's in the process. And like what we talk a lot about with creativity is that you're building in being creative and pushing yourself to be creative, you're building your resilience and you're building your belief in yourself that you can do it. And the more you believe in yourself that you can do it, truly believe that you can do it, not like false positivity, but actually have the experience of coming up with new ideas and knowing that you can do it, the more you're going to do it. So if you're cutting off that access to that kind of development by simply just latching onto something that AI is giving you, you are actually atrophying that muscle, so to speak. And that's really what we want to be building is that muscle.
100%. And so to give context to everyone at home
Yeah.
listening, give me a little bit of your background and kind
Yeah.
of like, a
What we're
lot of people
doing.
are hearing you speak on creativity.
Yeah.
Where do you come from on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I run Just Bloom School. We are the educational arm of the research that is done by my husband in conjunction with Ohio State and with U.S. Army Special Operations. And my husband's name is Angus Fletcher. And his theory of creativity is really the first new theory of creativity since World War II. I mean, I can go into the history if that's
Yeah.
something that's interesting. But basically, what he says is that creativity is really a narrative process. So it's this act of thinking narratively as opposed to thinking in the way that AI does, which is symbolically or in terms of representation, or always, I don't want to get too technical, but always in like the present tense.
Yeah.
So what we're doing is encouraging people to think the way that our brains actually think really when we're children, which is narratively. They think in story. That's how kids think. And there's all these studies that are very well known, particularly in educational circles, which are that children pre-education, if you test them for their creativity, they rank as creative geniuses, right? Like
That's insane.
98% of children that you test, age 5, 6, 7, using sort of that golden standard of a creativity test, will register off the charts in terms of creativity. And then they start going through the education system, and the creativity begins to decline. And that's because they're losing that ability. They're being trained out of that ability to think in terms of story. So what we're doing is simply reactivating that part of your brain that thinks naturally in story so that you can begin to be more creative. And then along with that creativity are those attending benefits, which is resilience and self-efficacy. And that, particularly when it comes to kids, that's what we want to see developing is that resilience. We want our kids to be resilient. And then we want ourselves, we want to feel that way. So that is really the push for me. That's the real motivation for me.
That's
Yeah.
incredible. So I have always been drawn to like storytelling,
Yeah.
and I think it was, starting to read Angus's first
Hmm.
book
Yeah.
a few years ago for me realizing that connection of all of the cartoons and
Yeah.
stories that we used to learn as a kid were something that actually was able to help us grow into the humans and adults that we are
Yeah.
today,
Absolutely.
because we're learning a lot of those lessons in a way that's super applicable. What is something that you think could help more adults try and like reframe the way they look at
Yeah.
things? Because we hear this word resilient a lot.
Yeah.
And one of the things I've been kind of working on is like this theory of like resiliency isn't necessarily avoiding the things that you don't like,
Right.
but it's being able to reframe the story that
Yeah.
you're telling yourself to actually be able to face that hard
Yeah,
thing.
yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really brilliant way to phrase it because your resilience comes from your own story. And so, motivational speakers, like, it's fun to go listen to a motivational speaker and you might leave feeling like super inspired. But what we know from research is that hearing somebody else's story may make you feel excited or like energized, but it's not going to actually have a direct effect on your own resilience, right? So, just because someone else was
Interesting.
able to do something doesn't mean that you listening are going to be able to do that. So, what you really want to do is mine your own history for moments in which you did something that was hard. And if you can constantly remind yourself, like, hey, and it doesn't have to be a big thing. I mean, it can be something I use, excuse me, I use an example for my daughter. When she was probably 8, all of a sudden she said, "I wanna play lacrosse." And, like, we're not a lacrosse family, I don't know how to play lacrosse, whatever. She joined a lacrosse team, she'd been to 2 practices before they had their game, and I was, driving her to the game, and I had to drop her off and then go park, and all of a sudden, as we're getting there, she says to me, like, "Mom, you don't think I'll have to be the goalie, do you?" And I was like, "Well, have you practiced goalie? Have you played that position?" She's like, "No, we haven't done that." And I was like, "I don't think so. One of the
Yeah.
kids who's more experienced, they'll be goalie." So I go and I park the car, and I come over to find her, and I can see she has a long blonde ponytail, I can see her across the field, and it's
Yeah.
one of these parents will understand, it's one of these places where there's like a million fields. And I'm making my way over and saying hi to neighbors. And when I get there, I can't see her. She's like disappeared. And there's this kid kind of yelling in my peripheral vision. And then I realize it's my child fully encased in like the
Oh
goalie gear.
no.
Right. And she was like, Mom, what do I do? And so she had to be the goalie and she had
Yeah.
no clue what she was doing. And did she do a great job? No, not as a goalie. I mean, maybe
Yeah.
she's deflected something. I don't even know. But the point is, she did it and she
Yeah.
stayed in that as the goaltender. She stayed there and she fought. And so, like, that's a story. It's a small thing in the grand scheme of her life. But whenever she hesitates about something, we can always be like, hey, remember, you're the girl who stayed in goal. And that rings true to her. So I think what you're
Yes.
looking for in your own story is moments when you did something that was hard for you, however you define that, and that it's a story that rings true. Because our brains can tell when we're kind of like BSing them, for lack of a better
Oh,
word. Like
100%.
they want a true story. So if you can like really just take the time to look back in your own history and be like, hey, I did this thing, and it might be when you were a kid. It could be a small thing where everyone thought I wasn't going to be able to do it, but I did do it. Or everyone thought this was a bad idea, but I really believed in it and I did it anyway. Those are the kinds of moments that you can remind your brain, like, hey, I've been here before. I've faced a challenge before and it's turned out differently than everyone else thought it would. And that's a real gift in terms of resilience.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think a big point that, most people can take away from that is like when it comes to trying to find those stories as you get older and as you're an adult, it's harder and harder to find those, difficult things that
Yeah.
you've done
Yeah.
because
Because
maybe
we
you
shy away from them.
yeah, we shy away from them as we get older,
Yeah.
and maybe you get a little bit more complacent, you go to work, you kind of do whatever. But if you think back, as far as you can to when you're a kid,
Yeah.
it's going to be a lot easier to find
Yeah.
those little hard things that you
I
did.
agree. I agree.
I think about, kind of for me in my like personal experience, when I was 11 years old,
Hmm.
this is like the most random thing, but my dad came home and was like, "Hey, do you want to do a triathlon?" And I was like, had no clue what
I
it
panic. I'm
was.
panicking right
Yeah.
now. Yeah.
I will say it was just like the sprint version. So it
Yeah.
wasn't, the whole
Right.
big one. But he was just like, yeah, like
What a
a
good
couple of my
dad.
friends said, hey, we want to go do this. We're going to train. I think it'd be a good thing for
Hmm.
you and your son to do. And so I trained, the year of being 11.
Oh my gosh.
And I was the youngest person in that race because I turned 12 literally like a month before the race, and like
Wow.
the cutoff was 12.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
But doing that
Yeah.
we'd show up every week, we'd swim.
The
I can't swim
commitment.
to save my life. I
Totally.
somehow had to figure out how to swim a quarter mile.
Oh
My
my
mom was
goodness.
terrified
I
because
bet.
I would think I was in the water for over an hour. And,
That's scary.
that
Yeah.
like terrifying moment of like, is your kid gonna make it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Oh my
and
gosh.
yeah,
Yeah.
but that like for me, it's like now being able to pull back on that
Yes.
experience and go, oh no, actually, like I did this hard thing.
Yeah.
And now that you're like saying all this, it's kind of like making me reflect on my childhood
Yeah.
and realizing like when you find those like little hard things that you can stack up, it makes anything that you want to do in the future
That's
so
right.
much easier.
What a gift your dad gave you.
Yeah.
I mean, that's an incredible story.
Yeah. It's
Yeah, and
amazing.
it's like it's amazing because like just what you're saying, like sometimes we don't take the time to reflect back on it and
Yeah.
think like, "Oh, this what I did and you did it." Like your brain knows you did it. And so that
Yeah.
is an incredibly powerful story. And so we always say the most important story you tell is the one you tell yourself about yourself.
Yes.
And if that's the one you can do, it just frames everything coming at you in a different way. And what we have found in our research is that it's much more powerful if you consistently remind yourself of that story. So if you're constantly saying, I, Brandon,
Yeah.
ran, swam, biked this triathlon at I did it. I did
Yeah.
it. So if that is like primed up in your brain, you're more ready to jump at that next opportunity than if you just pull it out when you need it. So that's another
That's
little tip I
interesting.
would say is just regularly reflect and remind yourself. Yeah. That's
Yeah.
a fantastic example. I love that one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's super fun. It's interesting because now I'm also, as I dive into like this
Yeah.
creative career a little
Mhm.
bit more, I'm trying to figure out ways to incorporate that kind of into the day-to-day life. So
Yeah.
it's not only reminding myself of the hard things I did to frame that story in a good way,
Yeah.
but also I think kind of, to kind of hit on like the next subject of this, but like how important it is to find those creative things that you can do every day.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, whereas using AI is great if you're trying to generate output,
Right.
but it's really bad if you're actually trying to like hone and get better at your
Yeah.
creative
To come up with
craft.
something new. It's never going to come up with something new. Like
Exactly.
one way I sort of look at it, and maybe this might sound a little glib, is like AI in a weird way kind of reminds me of like a really well written horoscope. Like
Yeah.
it's affirming what you're bringing to it, right? So
Yes.
if like you write in like I want to create a schedule for myself for the next week and I want to get these 3 things done or whatever, and it's going to spit out for you. Well, you're going to get up at 7 a.m. and you're going to have a healthy breakfast. Then
Yep.
and it's going to give you that schedule. It's just affirming what you already gave it and
Yes.
combining it with what a million other people have given it to sort of come to that happy, sort of centralized solution. As opposed to like if you're trying to do something creative, you're looking for something that's different, not something that's more generalized. And I think AI is always going to go for the more generalized solution, the more familiar, because that's all it
Yep.
has. Whereas you're trying to push for something new, which is very different.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think it's like an interesting thing to bring up in that, something for me, I use a lot of these AI tools and I love them kind of as a like, first draft is
Yeah.
kind of the way I approach it.
Okay.
But one of the things that has been fascinating is the more people I talk with and the more I realize, very few people are on the forefront of what's being used with this.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so, I have a friend right now that I've been, sending stuff that I've generated with AI and they're just like, wow, this is insane. I've never heard anything like this.
Yeah.
But the flip side to it is like I don't really feel super comfortable
Yeah.
using that as something to claim as my own
Right. It's a weird
because
feeling.
it's
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 not
such a weird
yours.
feeling. It's
Yeah.
not mine.
Yeah.
I like, yes, I like gave it the preliminary information that
Right.
it can do its thing, but it's not, something that I would put
Yeah.
my name on.
Yeah.
And so now it's like I'm trying to kind of find the balance of how do I use these tools as, an augment
Yeah.
to what I'm doing creatively to help speed up the menial tasks,
Yeah. That's right.
but not actually rely on them to like generate actual creative
Right,
things.
right, absolutely. Well, I think that just proves that you are a creative person because I think for a lot of people, if they're having that output, I think they're maybe comfortable putting out because like they're maybe not as invested in that part of their job or their responsibilities. But if you're
Yeah.
invested, if the creative output is what you want to be giving to the world, that is a really alienating feeling to be like, well, I don't remember writing that sentence. Like, I'm just going to
Yeah.
use writing because that's what I love to do.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't remember writing that sentence. Whereas if I really struggle with something, I never forget that I wrote that sentence, you know?
Yes.
Years later, I might be surprised, like, oh yeah, now I remember that, but I remember it. Whereas if something's been given to you from AI, it's not sticky for you. And so it's
Exactly.
hard to expect it to be sticky for other people. So like, again, just thinking about writing, it's like, you don't tend to remember things you read that are written by AI. You start to realize that they're punchy in the same way that 10 other people's writing is punchy because that was AI generated as well. So you start to see the commonalities between it.
Yeah.
And our brains like difference. They like specificity and uniqueness, and AI just isn't going to provide that.
If, like me, you hate ad breaks and podcasts, well, we're going to keep this one straight and to the point. If you need any production help, feel free to hit me up at brandongoodyear.com. Let's get back into the episode. Definitely. Have you guys found anything in like the research and whatnot? So I have been fascinated with the idea of literally pen and paper and like that as a creative medium where you're, slowing down, you're maybe not typing as fast.
Yes.
Have you found anything with like the physical, tangible, creative aspects?
Yeah, I can't speak too expertly to that, but we do know that when you're using pen and paper, it is a different part of your brain that is being activated than when you're typing. Or like I love, and I will admit this 100%, I love typing on my notes app on my phone because my thumb can move really fast. So if I have an idea ready to go, I can get it down. But when I'm trying to come up with ideas, to generate ideas, to develop ideas, I usually have a stack right here, legal pads, yellow paper, just writing and writing and writing. And that is absolutely what actually helps your brain develop them. And we're kind of built like the infrastructure around us for that to almost feel daunting to reach for a piece of paper, right? Because we always have a phone in our hand, we're always at a laptop or whatever it is, that it suddenly seems almost like it's an effort to get paper. So I try personally to keep just to keep pads everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You want to like lower the friction to be able to like generate those ideas because, the more you're able to kind of like get them written down or at least like start to process them.
Yeah.
That's
For me, that's how I learn. I don't know. I think it's like Joan Didion said she writes to learn how she feels. And I think that that's probably very universal for people. Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
That's awesome. What do you feel like would be I had a direction I was going to go with this and completely went off.
That's okay. We could talk more about the triathlon.
Yeah.
I'm like obsessed with this story now.
Yeah. I mean, it was a really fun time and kind of an interesting thing for me because, as a hyperactive kid, my mom can verify that. Like for me, it was literally just getting out a bunch of energy.
Yeah, of course.
And it's interesting because now I'm even seeing that in my own life, the physicality versus creativity.
Yes.
And it's like, when I sit down and I try and just like bang out a bunch of, creative content, whether that's videos or, writing down new ideas, if I just like sit and try and make it happen,
It doesn't work as
it's
well.
never going to work.
Yeah, you got to
But
move.
as soon as I, get up and go for a walk for a couple hours or anything like that, like I come up with my best, it's ironic for me. So, I'll go for a walk at a park near my house. And I will come up with the best idea when I'm deep in the woods, have no cell phone connection.
Can't write it down.
Can't write it down.
It's like on your
and
arm.
It's like, I'm like, okay, well, we'll figure this out someday. But it's also interesting because now I'm trying to figure out how to finalize the ideation of a really good creative idea with like the follow through and execution on it. Because I'm starting to notice for me personally, and I haven't figured out fully how to solve this, but being able to come up with a really creative idea when I'm unplugged from the grid.
Yeah.
But then actually be able to find the fine details to execute on it.
Yeah.
Because I can confidently say I'm a really good ideas person and I've figured out execution out of necessity.
Yes.
But trying to do both, I'm realizing now, like those need to be two separate jobs.
They are two separate things. Yeah. Well, I will say one thing I'll say about the walking is like you're not alone, right?
Yeah.
If you look through like the history of all innovators and creative geniuses, it's always like then from 3 to 5 every day they went for a walk. I mean, it's just across the board. That connection between action and thinking in action, because essentially that's what you're doing when you're coming up with something creative. You're thinking in action.
Yes.
And I think for me that was like a way to approach creativity that really transformed how I look at creativity in general. Because I think like a lot of people, I used to think, oh, well, some people are just more creative than others, or like some people just have these great ideas. They just come to them. I don't know. And it's like, well, you have to actually reframe it that it's simply, creativity is not just art. Art's one form, but it's simply the ability to come up with a new plan. And if you look at it that way, it's really liberating. And it's like what you're pointing out when you're in the woods and you're having these like ideas is like you have really probably excellent intuition. Like you
Yeah.
see the opportunity, you see the new idea. Um, but then what it is it's imagination is the next step, which helps you make the plans for execution. And those are two different brain powers
100%.
to develop. And so I think I actually struggle in the same way. Like I'm like, I get the idea, I'm excited by it. And then when it comes to the implementation, I really struggle. I don't always see how to get there, or if I see, maybe I lose steam or I start to second guess it, which I think
Yeah,
is a pretty common thing. But they are, I think, two separate skill sets to work on. Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Both of which can be developed.
Yeah, I another thing kind of like tying into that that I've been really interested in is, and I think, this came from a conversation years ago, but
Mhm.
it's the idea that creativity isn't necessarily in the planning,
Yeah.
but in the like in the moment ability to come up with an idea or a change of plans.
Adapting. Yeah.
And
Adaptability.
I always joke, I was thinking about it on my drive over here, like, the undiagnosed ADHD
Hmm.
that I have has weirdly become a superpower
Yeah.
because I've realized, and, again, having that story to tell myself, you are the most creative when you're, in the moment coming up with a
Yeah.
solution. And so, like, as much as my wife hates it, she's like, I need you to come up with a plan and, like, do this. I'm like, listen, I'm going to come up with the plan
Yeah.
at the literal last second,
Right.
but I promise you it's going to be the best plan ever
Nice.
because
Nice.
like I can figure it out on the fly.
Yeah.
And like that, I think that, unfortunately that leads into, this idea of social media and like the need to constantly be creating and
Yeah.
outputting, creative work, but being able to, do it kind of on the fly
Mhm.
actually can weirdly be a like ability to train that
Yeah,
creativity.
that ability, yeah. I mean, that makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, what we talk about when we're doing creativity training, particularly for businesses, is we say to them, like, we're going to work on a problem that you're having with your business right now, and you're going to leave here with a plan. But the plan is not what's important. We're not
Yes.
here to train a plan, we're here to train a planner. So that you can
Yes.
become better at adapting as things change. And again, all of our research is done with the military. And like they say, they have perfect plans. And then a
Yeah.
shot is fired and there are no plans,
Yeah.
and it has to be that ability to understand, like, okay, well, that plan is gone. It is gone. So
Yeah.
what do we do now? And that's where the creativity kicks in. And I think like that's just what you're feeling on the ground. And I
Yeah.
think to your point was how like to help people on like a daily basis be more creative. And it's like just do something differently than you normally do. Like if you
Yeah.
make the same dinner every Tuesday night, find a different recipe and just try it. And then maybe it'll work, maybe it won't work, but maybe it'll work really well. And that'll be another one of your stories where you're like, I tried this really hard thing and it worked.
Yeah.
Just simply opening up to like different ways of doing things that you routinely do. And, I'm not saying reinvent the wheel every day. Like we
Yeah.
don't want our days to be like all over the place. When
Yeah.
things are working, let them work. Just let
Yeah.
them be. Let them keep working. But when you notice that there's like a drop in effectiveness, like we call it the effectiveness drop, when you start to realize like something that used to work really well for you just isn't working as much. And social media is a great example for
Yeah.
people who are constantly posting. They may have a format or a template or whatever that's really worked really well, and then suddenly there's no response. And again, you're bringing an algorithm into play,
Yeah.
so it's kind of not really a fair example. But the point is, it's not working anymore. So
Yeah.
that's the time to try something new, and that's your prompt essentially. That's your
Yeah.
sign, and like it's an invitation. Like
Yeah.
have some fun.
Yeah. I think the way that people frame it is like the most important part. You can see this as, oh, the algorithm's against me.
Yeah.
Or you can see it as, okay, great.
Yeah.
This is time for us to come up with a really
Yeah.
cool, fun, creative new idea.
Exactly. Yeah.
And
And it might not work, but
yeah.
like you've still gotten somewhere new, and then that sets you on like a launch pad to keep going somewhere new. Like you're a different person in your output than you were a week ago. And like that's something to celebrate because you're only going to keep coming up with more ideas if you keep pushing. So,
Exactly.
yeah. Yeah.
I'm excited. So tell me a little bit more about like the work you guys have done with the
Yeah.
military. Cause that like for me, I mean, when when people hear military,
Yeah.
they have one vision in their
They
mind.
do.
And the
Yeah.
last thing on their mind is creativity.
Totally. Thank you for understanding that. Because when Angus came upstairs one day and he said, we're going to run this test with the US military, they want to test this creativity. And I was like, well, wait, do we want the military to be creative? Like, aren't
Yeah.
they supposed to be following orders?
Yeah.
But we are talking really about like military leadership and then people on the ground. If you're on the ground, you've got to
Yeah.
be creative. And so they were fantastic. He was contacted based on the research he had done into creativity. It was U.S. Army Special Operations, and they said, "Can we take this theory you have and can we test it? And we're going to test it on our operators, and you can show us the exercises, but we're going to run it. It's going to be
Yeah.
independently run, independently verified." And I guess just to give a little background if you're interested, and I think
Yeah.
that this is something I didn't know about the military, certainly didn't know,
Yeah.
is the US military is the single greatest investor in terms of financial investment and also time spent in human creativity. And where this came from was World War II, essentially. Like it got to a point where the US Army was looking sort of at projections,
Yeah.
and they knew they were going to win the war in Europe. They knew they were going to win, but they just knew that there was going to be such like catastrophic loss of life. And so they started to think, well, there's got to be a better way. And so they were really lucky because they had in their ranks, they had this psychologist whose name is J.P. Guilford, and his name might be familiar to some people. Who was sort of on the cutting edge of brain science at the time. And he said, I can do research into creativity. And ideation, which you mentioned earlier, you wanted to ideate something, that was really his theory. He broke down the brain into two separate computational processes. And he basically said, like, our brain functions on divergent thinking, essentially brainstorming, and convergent thinking, which is pattern recognition. So looking
Yeah.
for patterns and also coming up with random ideas. So that's how computers operate. And that's where he was pulling it from, because this is the
Interesting.
40s and
Yeah.
computers were, I mean, that was the new thing, right? And so he said, if we just reduce our brain processes to those two operational processes, we're going to be our creativity is going to be as optimized as possible. This is where OpenAI comes from. Okay, so it's divergent thinking, convergent thinking. This is where design thinking comes from. It's all his theory. So we are still really operating in that world of Guilford. And so that's where standardized testing started coming from. So the military started using his theories. They started building out these assessment tests. So they would have recruits come, and these assessment tests would tell them, okay, well, this person will be, and I'm just, um,
Yeah.
sort of like this person will be a great pilot, this person, whatever it is, very highly specific assessment tests. But then what started happening was that they would get recruits who would ace these assessment tests, but then were crumbling in the field. Like the resilience was
Mm.
gone, and that ability, like we were just talking about, to adapt when a problem came. They didn't know what to do. They could beat the simulators, they could do everything to perfection. But when they were actually in a situation that was out of their control, they couldn't come up with that next step, right? They couldn't make a new plan. And then we started seeing the same thing happening, whereas the education system started adopting from really the military these assessment tests, right? So suddenly standardized testing for kids. And that's when we start seeing this drop in creativity amongst students. So education systems experiencing the same thing. We've known for more than 30 years, literally more than 30 years, that the longer you are in school, the less creative you become. And then the military was seeing, okay, well, maybe there's something we miss. Like, yes, we're optimized and we are efficient, but like if we're having this issue with resilience and adaptability, like, there's a problem here. And so that's why they actually reached out to Angus when they read his studies, because they saw that this was a new way of looking at creativity that was connected to building resilience. So they took it, they tested it with, I think it was 260 military professionals. And what came back was so shocking, because what they saw, I think it was a 2 hour essentially workshop that the test ran, was that we saw an average 14-point increase in effective IQ. So that's intelligence relating to creativity. So over
Yeah.
2 hours, and we were like, but this is crazy, because you don't like go and do a couple exercises and then like
Yeah.
suddenly sprout new IQ. That just isn't
Yeah.
what happens. But what was happening was, and this goes back to what we were talking about earlier, is that the exercises they were doing was activating that narrative thinking, that intelligence that they had, that they've always had since they were kids, but that they've been trained not to use. So
That's
it's not that
crazy.
they were growing new IQ, they were just using IQ that they weren't able to access before. And so that was really stunning results, really exciting. And then we took basically the exact same exercises and brought them here to the Worthington school system, which is our home district where our children go to school.
Yeah.
And we ran the same studies over 2 summers for campers, right at that age where creativity starts to really drop. And we saw basically the almost exact same results, that the kids showed substantial increases in creativity, but then also resilience and self-efficacy. So the same thing that worked with special operators was working with like third, fourth, and fifth graders, which was really exciting to us. So, yeah, the military was amazing. They gave us a commendation medal in 2023 for what they call groundbreaking leadership training. And so we
That's amazing.
take those. Yeah, that was really overwhelming and touching and just incredible. They actually did the ceremony in this room. They came and pinned it on Angus and everything. It was really neat. And so they've adopted that training, all those exercises that Angus built out, and then I run them with businesses. So it's pretty fun and wild. Sometimes it takes a little translating, because a lot of the exercises were originally written with a military audience in mind. So a question might be like, think back on your favorite battle in history, things that like your day-to-day business person doesn't have, but we can translate that. And that's essentially what I do is I go around with businesses and work with them on their creativity. Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah. It's really fun. It's
Yeah.
really neat to see because I think there is that sort of moment where I think for a lot of people, like lay people, when they hear creativity, they just think like, oh, like art, right? Or like, oh God,
Yeah.
is she going to come and like make me finger paint or whatever? And it's just like, no, this is like literally your ability, just like you said, to come up with a new plan when the first one doesn't work. That's
Yeah.
it. And every business person is constantly doing that.
Yeah, I was just thinking about this a few days ago, the idea of like a creative versus an artist. And
Yeah.
I think, especially coming from the world of media and
Yep. Yep.
advertising, there's a lot of extremely creative people
That's right.
because you have to be, problem solving on your feet all day, every day
Yeah.
to get people to come buy your product, service, whatever you're doing.
Yeah.
But we're seeing this trend away from like the pure artists who
Hmm.
are like creative for creative sake.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I think like there's something that I'm even trying to kind of like quantify a little bit now is like how to realize that these people are super important
Yeah.
because that level of creativity, they're the like purest form of
Yeah.
storytellers
Yeah.
in our society. And so being able to look at the artists as a way to communicate extremely
Yeah.
hard, complicated societal issues
Yeah.
through the simplicity of
Yeah.
art that everyone can like relate to in
See.
some way and
Yeah.
see.
Yeah. I mean, they're the ones who see the future. I mean,
Yeah.
that's just it. They're seeing that, like you said, when you go out in the woods and you have that idea, they're the ones who are seeing something that no one else has seen. And then the term we like to use is that they then double down on it, right? So we call it spotting the exceptional. And that's a
Yeah.
military term, right? So it's
That's cool.
seen not if we're talking about how ideation or design thinking or open AI pushes us to notice patterns, human
Yeah.
creativity notices the exception. So you're looking for what is the exception to the rule, and then the artist doubles down on it, or the creative person doubles down on it. But the artists that do that, I mean, and you can go out throughout history, whether you're talking about Van Gogh or Marie Curie as a scientist who's doing it, because scientists, they're artists, and like
Yeah.
sometimes we reduce them more to math, which is sort of a different way of thinking, more logic-based way of thinking. But they're really artists who have scientific breakthroughs. And then down to like Steve Jobs, you're just
Yeah.
seeing something that other people aren't looking for, and then having that confidence and that belief in it to just push it and push it and push it. And that's, I think, what makes someone an artist.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So for people that want to kind of dive more into understanding like story thinking
Yeah.
and that side of it, like what would you say, someone who currently is maybe working, let's paint the picture. They're working an office job. They don't really see the creative and the
Yeah.
mundane of day to day. They get their Starbucks on their way to work. They
Totally.
eat lunch at noon.
Yep.
They listen to the same podcast
Yeah.
at 3 o'clock.
Yeah.
How can someone like that
Yeah.
be able to like, in the moment, if they listen to this podcast, be able to flip that switch?
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
And
I don't know if they have to flip it because I love what you're saying with like that the idea of this like really set schedule.
yeah,
Because if you look again, like going through history of all these creative people who took walks to figure out how they felt, they usually had very set schedules because
yeah,
like discipline is what enables us, that gives us the freedom to get the things done that we need to get done, but then also have that space for creativity, right? So if you're someone who has that schedule, you get your Starbucks, you get to your desk at a certain time, you start. My easiest tip, I would say, is just spend 10 minutes a day reading biographies of people who are different than you. So, real life people who did things differently. Because we so often reach, particularly when it comes to reading or social media, we look at people who are similar, right? Who we can
yeah,
relate to. And instead, look for someone who you respect who's like totally different than you are. And just 10 minutes a day, because what it does is it forces your brain to think from their perspective, which is different than yours. So you're getting lifted out of it. And
yeah,
then, as stupid as it sounds, like the example you gave was like, writing an email. Sometimes, like, I'll get an email where I don't know how to respond, right? Like I feel a little uncomfortable, but then I have this like reference library in my head of these artists or these thinkers who I really admire, who I've done a lot of reading from. And what I do, and what I would encourage people to do when they spend time reading them, is just like you reflect on your childhood story, actively reflect. Like, what is it that makes this person different? Like, what is their perspective? What makes their perspective different than mine? And then I just write that email like they would.
that's
Like I'm just
crazy.
like,
Yeah,
and
that's awesome.
do I know how Georgia O'Keeffe would write an email? Of course
No,
not. But I know how, having paid attention to the way she lived her life, how I think she would. And that's different than how I, Sarah, would write that email. And that has helped me. I mean, it sounds so silly,
yeah,
but that has really helped me be like, oh, actually, I'm not comfortable with this. And this is how I'm going to address it. And I'm going to be really direct in a way that maybe isn't natural to Sarah, but is the correct way. that little bit of hoisting yourself out of your normal way of doing things, like your knee-jerk automatic response to things, which not and there isn't necessarily anything wrong with that,
Yeah.
but it's very thrilling in a way. And then it just starts to expand your mind and your sense of what you are capable of. And that's sort of how that creativity starts to take root. So that's what I would say. Like pick up a couple biographies. The next time you reach for a novel or whatever it is that you like to read that's familiar or that you're rereading. I'm a big rereader. I know a lot of us are,
Yeah.
but a lot of that's comfort, right?
Yeah.
Just give yourself just 10 minutes. Like you can go to the comfort read after, read somebody who does things differently than you do. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah. I also kind of was thinking about this. You can think about things in like story
Yeah.
and narrative and being able to embody those, whether it's fictional or
Hmm.
real life or those other people that you're reading.
Yeah.
But I also find it interesting, kind of the way I like to see it is like I'm constantly looking for those like real time patterns
Yeah.
that I can then apply into whatever it is I'm doing. And so, if you're constantly find yourself having to answer really challenging emails,
Yeah.
you have this library of people that you
Yes.
can pull from to be able to, you find the patterns of how these people are, creating their
Yeah.
responses. And it won't necessarily be a direct, I'm going to respond in this person's
Right. Like, I
voice
don't know what they're going to
because
say.
it's,
Yeah.
you wouldn't know what they're going to
No.
say. But the flip side is like, you're creating your own organic thought
Exactly. Yeah.
because you're using the culmination of all of those people.
Yeah. And I would say, like you're saying, like you're looking for their patterns. Like I would even push it farther and say what you're really looking is what's exceptional about them.
Yes.
What makes them special? And then if you can just embody that and then shoot out that email, then it becomes part of you. Like you've just broadened your own, your mind, but also just your own lived experience because that's
Yeah.
suddenly like going back to like remembering things that you wrote. That suddenly is an email that you wrote. That's yours. So you've just expanded yourself. And I think that's really powerful.
Yeah.
It's definitely felt very liberating to me at times.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. Um, I had an idea and it just,
Well, one thing I
yeah,
just will say, one thing you're touching on too is like if we're figuring out what makes them exceptional, like, and I think that this is a big part of our training is what we call causal reasoning, which is
yeah,
coming up with the why
yeah,
behind everything. And I know, there's a lot of like that's kind of a buzzword, right? Like, what's your
yeah,
why? And a lot of people have this idea like, oh, your why is something that stays constant your whole life or it's really easy and I do this a lot with groups and this comes up all the time like what is your why and like the go-to answer especially when we're talking with business people of a certain age, oh, it's my family. Okay, but
yeah,
that is not really specific, right? Because what about your family? Is it your
yeah,
family's financial security? Is it your family's growth? Is it your family time together? Like those are different reasons to do things. And what we find in terms of creativity training is that the more specific you can get about your why, the easier it is to come up with multiple plans towards the future because you know why you're doing it. And I know it sounds so basic,
yeah,
but if you say like, "Oh, well my why is my family," and then I say, "Okay, well here's the challenge. You have 2 hours on a Saturday. What are you going to do?" Well, I don't know what that looks like for your family, but if I say that my why is my children's like athletic development or what I'm
yeah,
just coming up with something.
yeah,
Then those 2 hours are going to be spent like doing soccer drills in the backyard. Like
yeah.
suddenly the way in which you're going to live your life and be creative with your time becomes so much more clear.
Yeah.
And so I think that it's finding that why is really exciting.
It's interesting you bring that up because the series that kind of put me on the map in
Hmm.
terms of a creative, I called it "This Is My Why,"
Yeah.
and it was
I remember we
literally,
talked about this
yeah.
years ago. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
The whole concept behind
Yeah.
it was literally just double clicking into what is your intuitive
Yeah.
why.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's funny because I had, over the 12 people that I featured in the series,
Yeah.
I had a few people that, one I was dealing with PR people, and
Okay.
then another person that was like, using it for more brand promotional.
Hmm.
And I remember sitting down to like have the conversation with them, hit record, handed them the mic. And, I just over time kind of figured, if I'm sitting down with someone for an hour, the conversation, I'm going to get a very clear
Yeah.
idea of like
Who they
how
are.
to direct them to that
Hmm.
specific why.
Yeah.
And so I would ask the prompt, and she looked at me and she's like, "I'm gonna have to riff for like 5 minutes because I think I got to get my words right."
Okay.
And so I just let her go.
Yeah.
At the end, she's like, "Okay, like I trust you on this." And I sent over the video, and she's like, "That's the most insane thing ever. What did you do?"
What was your voodoo?
I
Yeah.
I, I told her I was like, "I just used the first 60 seconds of what you said because I knew that was going to
Yeah.
be like your why is that gut reaction
And she probably
to
hadn't thought
whatever it
about
is."
it.
And I think most people don't think
No, they
about
don't.
that. Like, and so being able to ask that question and then give that as something that people can now reference. And
Yeah.
it's like, I would say, for anyone at home, like if you have an opportunity and you think about it, like ask yourself, why am
Yeah.
I doing this?
Yeah.
And just record that as a voice memo and like have that to
Totally.
reference.
Yeah.
Because if you can just go back to that 30 or 60-second piece and remember why you're doing, that'll help you reorient better than
Um,
any executive training or
A
anything.
thousand times over.
Yeah.
Like, and we even just do this in our house. Like every time I have a moment, I'm like, oh, I don't know if I want to do this or this. It's like, wait, go back to your why. And I'm like, oh, the answer's clear. And sometimes
Yeah.
it's not the answer you want,
Yeah.
but it's like, yes, you have to go back. It's then the decisions make themselves, and then it's the only way. And and this ties into creativity, I think, really, really well. It's like, again, there's a certain level when you're talking about artists or just really creative people of discipline, self-discipline, that like sometimes I don't want to do the thing that connects to my
Yeah.
why. Well, then is that really my why? Because I got to be clear about that. And if it is my why, then I have to make the harder choice.
Yeah.
Sometimes it is the harder choice, but that's how you get somewhere with it. And I think one of the exercises we do in so many of our workshops, I think it's so simple but really powerful, is we call it delay the why or reserve the why. And we put people in conversation with each other, and they ask each other questions, but they cannot ask why. They can only ask who, what, where, when, and how. And then by listening and asking questions in ways that feel awkward, because we immediately want to know why, because it
Yeah.
helps us categorize the person we're talking to, right? It's efficient, it's optimal. But if you can hold off for a while, and people can do this just in conversation, and I don't mean like suddenly going out and interrogating people, but just
Yeah.
if you even just ask one more question in a conversation with someone, as opposed to asking them why, or the other thing that I think we do a lot in conversation is saying, oh, well, that happened to you, like that happened to my sister's best friend's husband too. Like you
Yeah.
immediately start to like connect, because I mean, we're human and we want to connect. But a lot of times by connecting in that way, we're kind of eliminating what is special about their experience. And if we can push a little more to like get them to share again that piece of exceptional information about them, a lot of times we can help them figure out the why. And their why might be something like, I think this is probably what was also occurring. It might be something that they haven't even thought about before,
Yeah.
that you can help them discover about themselves. And that's a really cool thing to be able to do, to suddenly realize, oh, I do have the why, and it's maybe it's not what I thought. And maybe I need to rethink how I'm approaching certain things. It's exciting.
Definitely. And
Yeah.
that's super powerful because I think what you're also doing is kind of like going against the grain to
Yeah.
what common wisdom is. Like you want to relate to someone and
Right.
show that you understand. And,
We
people
want to
want,
so much. Yeah.
we want that sympathy, we want
Yeah.
that
Yes.
empathy.
Yeah.
But I think like pushing in the opposite direction, you're actually making them feel more unique
Yes.
and more special.
Yes.
And that, like, in a weird way, will, show that person that you respect what they're going through and know that I won't be able to know and relate to every single detail of what
Right.
you're doing. I think that's like pretty
But I
powerful.
validate it. I hear
Yes.
it. And like I realize that it's special and unique. And I think it's, if you can do that with people, and we do this a lot with sales teams, because
Yeah.
it's like people who are working in sales, like their clients want to be heard. And if you're a salesperson and you can help someone realize something that maybe they need that they haven't even realized yet, because you're listening to them and asking them those harder questions, I mean, they are going to be, really feel that bond to you. And maybe as a salesperson, you then have to realize, I don't actually sell that thing. Maybe you have to
Yeah.
direct them somewhere else. But again, you're building that trust, because you're seeing what they need that is specific to them and not to another client you had, but them. And you're helping them find it, whether it's something you provide or something somebody else does. You're that person helping them find it. And that, I think, is gold. Yeah.
100%. Yeah. That's something I always come up in like the field of marketing. It's
Yes.
like, one of my biggest, marketing idols is Seth Godin. And I think his principle where he talks about, I think it's like building a shelf or something like that.
Okay.
And he's like, uh, or no, what is it? Uh, Buying a drill bit.
Okay.
Because it's like, he's like, you're not actually trying to buy a drill bit. You're trying to put a hole in the wall.
Oh,
And
right.
he's like, you're not actually really trying to put a hole in the wall. You're trying to build a shelf.
Okay.
And he's like, you don't actually really want to build a shelf. He's like, you just want the love and attention and praise from your spouse who's been
Oh,
asking for
this
this
is the real
bookshelf
why.
for
Yeah.
like years.
Mhm.
And it's like, for me, I'm literally every time it's getting to a point where I'm like, every time I walk into, whether it's a coffee shop or a restaurant or something, I'm always looking for those touch points that are like 7 degrees back.
Yeah.
Because I realize I'm like, like I've had moments where like, I was just picking up dinner the other night
Mhm.
and I pulled into the parking spot that was the very first parking
Okay.
spot in the area. Should have been within their, purview of the camera to show, oh, someone's here to pick up their
Mhm.
carryout order. I sat there for 10 minutes.
Oh, saying
And
that.
I realized, I'm like, oh, they don't know I'm here. So then I moved over into the spot and the guy came out literally
Okay.
30 seconds later with my food.
So you
But
saw.
it's like that moment of like, oh, actually, like, I had to put in my make and model of my car and like all this other information. So they
So they
should
could find
roughly
you.
know
Yeah.
who's going to be out there. And it's like, seeing that all over the place now, that just for me is like something that's super fascinating. And I'm
Mhm.
always having this conversation with people like, whatever you're trying to sell, and coming from the world of coffee, I'm always like,
Right.
you know, show your clients and customers the respect of, hey, we're going to give you all this information. We want you to buy our coffee, and we know that you can make it at home.
Mhm.
But
Here's why.
we also know that, you're probably still going to come in and buy your cup of coffee on your way to work.
Yeah.
Um,
And what sets this apart from the other
exactly.
ones, the other options you have.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, I think going to like that Seth Godin example too, it's like, and I think this is something that another misconception that people have about creativity is they think it's random.
Yeah.
And it's like using that example, like that shelf is not random. Like
No.
that, it's because like the spouse wanted. I mean, there's a reason, and I think it's like that, and it's a buzzword, but intentionality. But
Yes.
I think it's like yeah, creativity is like real creativity again. It's just not random. It's finding something exceptional and it's doubling down on it with purpose and with discipline. And like same thing with the coffee, right?
Yeah.
Like these are the beans we roast. We roast them
Yep.
this way because of this. And to be able to tell that story because it is a story and it really exists, that's going to resonate in people's minds in a way that, you know, it, other things, just facts don't, whereas the story really will.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's crazy. And I was trying to figure out how to come back to the
Yeah.
the discipline side of things, but I think that's something that's huge that a lot of people don't really want to dive into.
No,
And
I
one of my friends, she always gives me a hard time 'cause she's like, "Brandon, you just love to do everything the absolute hardest way possible." And I'm like, I've never like until this
Yeah.
conversation, I've never really been able to understand why that is, and
Yeah.
whether that's, I need the extra challenge or whatever.
Yeah.
But being able to have that discipline to find the, maybe the unbeaten path
Yeah.
or the thing that will allow me to have that higher level of
Yeah.
creativity, and incorporating that into my day-to-day life. I think, for more people, I wish, the idea of discipline
Yeah.
didn't have to be this, taboo
Right.
subject,
Right.
because if you can find that way to be disciplined,
Yeah.
that's going to open up a whole world of freedom and like the things that people actually want in
Yeah.
life a lot
Yes.
more.
Yes. I mean, yes. Can you just like frame, oops, sorry,
Yeah.
frame that? That is so, that's the key, right? I
Yeah.
think, and I know, and I struggle with it a lot. And especially I think a lot of groups we work with, we particularly have a lot of young, like, or not young parents, but parents.
Yeah.
And like discipline can just kind of like fall to the wayside when you're suddenly like held hostage to these small people, right?
Yeah.
It's like, and you have your job on top of it and everything. And it's sort of like, no, and unfortunately, discipline, like you said, can be taboo, but it's like you can either look at it as something that's really hard and no one wants to hear this, but
Yeah.
it's just like if it was easy, everyone would be able to do
Yeah.
it. It's like there's not a million Van Goghs walking around because it was hard.
Yes.
But that should also feel inspiring too, because again, I'm just use the example of Van Gogh. Like he wasn't a good painter when
Yeah.
he started. You know what I mean? He
He had to
had
stick with it.
to work at it. And
Yeah.
it's like, so you can work at something too. And I'm not saying you're going to become Van Gogh, but you're sure as anything going to become so much better at it.
Yeah.
And again, you're going to feel that growth in yourself. And that, everyone always talks about like like the prize is really the journey, but it actually is.
Yeah.
And so I think if we can get people sort of tuned into that and not as afraid of discipline, and I mean, everything around us is designed to make us undisciplined. I mean, again, just going back to our phones and stuff, it's just like, it's hard to be disciplined, but we can't expect our children to be that way if we're not that way. And so I think it always comes back to like as I said, we did all this research with kids, but like, I'm not an early childhood educator. Like I work with adults and it's because A, because that's what I do, but
Yeah.
B, because like our kids cannot learn it unless we're already doing it,
Yeah.
and that it's a struggle. It's a struggle for all of us. A struggle for me, I know.
Yeah, same every day.
Yeah.
It's like, trying to find the discipline to, stick with a workout regimen. If I'm
Yes.
cooking I mean, the big thing for me is like doing the dishes at the end
Yeah.
of the night. Like I remember going
It's a
in the
great
new year, I
example.
was like, okay, I'm going to do the dishes at
Mhm.
the end of the night. I don't care if I'm up till 10 o'clock.
Yeah.
I have to do
The kitchen
this.
has to be clean.
Literally less than 2 months into the year, completely went out the window.
Oh, really?
But yeah,
Okay.
I
That's
do my
funny.
best,
Yeah.
but not all the way
Yeah.
there.
It's
But
hard. Yeah.
yeah, it's really, really
Yeah.
difficult. And it's
Yeah.
actually interesting because I like over the years of, learning production and
Mhm.
everything that I've had the opportunity to kind of figure out on the fly,
Mhm.
I've had all these ways and ideas. I'm like, oh, I can teach this in a way that's more streamlined than everything I had to go through to get to where I'm
Yeah.
at.
But you wouldn't
And
know
I,
that if you hadn't gone through all that. Yeah.
well, no, you're hitting on a very specific point
Yeah.
because I literally sat down, I recorded about an hour of, material that I was going to put together in this course. And it very quickly hit me. And I was like, oh, the reality of why I can do what I do
Yeah.
is not because of the information. And if I streamline this, which
Mhm.
I've streamlined information for a lot of people,
Yeah.
and I still see them put out horrible stuff
Right.
because it's like
They
you
didn't
don't actually
they
have
didn't
the
climb that
context to
mountain.
why all of these things need to be done this
Yeah.
way. And it's like the people that actually like they take that. I have one person that I've like taught all this to, and he took that information and then literally went in between to go find all the like difficult
Oh,
things.
interesting. So
And so it's like
he like beta tested it for himself essentially.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so now it's like he gets to be a sounding board for me on like different ideas because we can actually like dive into the like really hard, challenging parts of what we're doing in production
Wow, good for
and figuring
him.
out how to like streamline that,
Yeah.
which is cool because he's like a really young kid and is able to like grow in this field, I think
Yeah.
exponentially faster than most people,
That's a
which is
hard thing
cool.
to do when someone hands you essentially the manuscript
Yeah.
to then actually force yourself to like troubleshoot at every step. Like good for
Exactly.
him.
And
That's really impressive.
I'm thankful that I have enough kind of, I call them my like blind spots in the
Yeah.
production world that he was able to go, oh, you don't actually know how to do all this other stuff. So I'm just going to lean
Oh,
into doing that
yeah.
to find those challenges.
Yeah.
But I think like in terms
He's
of,
an artist. He just did
yes,
exactly what we're talking about. He spotted the
exactly.
exceptional. Yeah.
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 Which is really cool. And so now I'm kind of like, I think, uh, trying to figure out how to bring this full circle
Yeah.
in terms of like helping people find the information they need, but then
Mhm.
also creating those opportunities for people to be creative through the whole process.
Yeah, to actually get to embark on that process themselves,
Yeah.
to earn that knowledge, right? I think it's tricky because we live in a society right now where it's like instant gratification at all
Yes.
times. Like how many times do we reach for our phones just to look up the answer for something? And
Yeah.
like, and I find myself a lot pausing and being like, do I need that answer? Like, why am I even
Yeah.
doing that? Because I know if I look it up, I'm also then going to look at 10 other things
Yeah.
before I even remember what I was doing in the first place.
Oh,
And so it's
same.
just this like entire way in which A, we're looking for things to be easy. B, we're getting distracted and we can't even help it. And so it's like, again, it's everything is designed to keep us from earning that knowledge that you just like so beautifully described
Yeah.
earning. And like that is that, I mean, isn't that what are we here for? I
Yeah.
mean, just quite frankly, if we're not trying to learn and share. And I just think that our dependence on our phones and it's not just our phones. I mean, to be totally clear, like the creativity crisis in students and children predates smartphones.
Yeah.
So do smartphones make it worse? Yes. Are they the cause? No, they're not the cause.
Yeah.
But I'm just using that as an example. It's like you have to be willing to get up and like live the fight to get to that kind of knowledge. And your friend that you're describing, like he seems very committed. That's his way of living.
Yeah.
And I think that it's like if we can just encourage everyone to try a little harder to do that. And I'm not saying that in a pedantic way because I definitely have my days where I'm like
Yeah.
reading something online and I don't really accomplish much. And then I'm like, oh, I wonder why I feel crummy. Well, I feel crummy because I didn't use my brain.
Yeah.
But it's a fight. It's an active fight. The world is not set up for us to become creative in those ways.
Definitely. It's interesting and kind of thinking on like something you said earlier, in terms of like the longer you're in school, the less creative you tend to be.
Yeah.
And I feel like I got a blessing because I graduated high school and then that was the end
Yeah.
of it. And
yeah.
even,
You did probably
yeah.
get a blessing. Yeah.
But it's interesting because now I'm like curious, like, I, as a kid going through, I was only in the public school system for kindergarten and first grade.
Okay.
And then my mom pulled me out due to like the quality of schooling. She was like, this is ridiculous. Like
She
we're
homeschooled
not going to get the challenge that we need. So I was homeschooled second grade through high school.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's fantastic. Yeah.
And it was a ton of fun, learned a lot, challenged. The most annoying part of it was having to do like 7-digit long division in third grade because my mom was like, he needs a challenge.
Yeah. We're going to push you here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think like, so one of the things I'm curious your thoughts on
Yeah.
is like the way that our education system is going, we're, beating out creativity
Yeah.
because like it's this idea of you have to test well, you have to follow the rules.
Yeah.
And I think like I see a lot of people now kind of like in my age group and above are kind of coming to this reality of a lot of the way we're doing schooling is not as effective
Yeah.
because we're teaching kids how to regurgitate
Yeah.
answers when it's like actually what I want you to do is
Come up
learn
with
how
something
to
new.
like come up with something new
Yeah.
or to be like assertive in your
You're
research
right.
and how to
That's
like
right.
fact check and like do all those
Yep.
things because like the reality is we live in a society now. Google exists,
Right. There's no
ChatGPT search
incentive. There's no
exists.
incentive. Yeah.
You can find information
Yeah.
immediately.
Yep.
You don't need to memorize
Right.
scripts on scripts on
Yeah.
scripts. You need to learn how to like read stories, think for yourself.
Yeah. It's kind of calling the bluff of education to have
Yeah.
all these tools, right? Because essentially what's been happening is we've been teaching kids to think like computers think, and computers are always going to do it faster. Like they're
I never thought of it that
Yeah, we're
way.
teaching
That's
them,
insane.
we're convergent, divergent thinking. That's what education is, logic based. By the time a kid is in third grade in our country, 95% of their education is logic based. Now, there's nothing wrong with logic. We want them to have a logic education, but story's been pushed out, and our brain thinks in logic and our brain thinks in story. And it's the story thinking where the resilience comes in. And so, if we can sort of restore that balance a little bit, that's what we're looking for. Not to push logic out, but just to
Yeah.
restore the balance because, you know, okay, yeah. So if my kid can pass that standardized test, but I can feed that test to a computer that's going to ace that. So why am I spending all my time trying to get my kid to think that way when he has the computer as a tool? It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Our kids are in public school. They're in a great public school district. We love our schools. We love our teachers. I think the thing is to help the kids understand, and it's a struggle, right? That there are these two ways of thinking, really pushing them to make some of their own choices and really pushing them in terms of like asking them just quite frankly, like why is education important to you? Whether you're in
Yeah.
third grade or fourth grade or fifth grade. I mean, like our daughter, she, a lot of her stuff, she likes history and a lot of her history, it's just memorizing like three facts. She'll come home and she knows three facts about this pharaoh or three facts about this pharaoh, and then pushing her. And it takes time as a parent. I know time is, a limited resource of saying, well, what happened in between that pharaoh's reign and that pharaoh? Like, how did that lead to this? And you realize that as they get farther and farther into their education, those kind of conversations aren't happening just because there isn't time. And so then it's like, okay, well, you like that pharaoh. Let's go find a book about that pharaoh because you're not going to have time to read that book in school, but you're going to have to do it. So it's augmenting. And then the teachers are ready. Like, they are ready to talk about it. They
Yeah.
know it. They want to share it. It's just that they're on a timetable, right?
Yeah.
And that's really complicated. And then working, and I do think more and more schools are beginning to bring in sort of a mastery approach to certain things, which I think helps foster more deep learning as
Yes.
opposed to grade. I mean, we really see as my daughter in particular, because she's my older child, as she progresses more, all of a sudden she's like fascinated with what her grades are. And she's in the wrong family because we're
Yeah.
like, we don't care. Like,
Yeah.
what did you learn? Like,
Yeah.
why is that important? And that's a struggle because, externally she wants the grade.
Yeah.
But sometimes getting the grade is in conflict with the deeper learning.
Yeah.
And so it's figuring that out. And I think we're very lucky because the resources are there in terms of their teachers to help them with that stuff. So they're in a great place. But I think that that's how parents can be helpful, is just figure out, what is your child interested in? Don't tell them what to be interested in, because
Yeah.
it's never, as we know, as I'm sure you know with your long division memory, it doesn't
Yeah.
work.
No, 100%.
What is your kid excited about? And then have conversations and ask those questions. Why was so and so a good president if they're interested in history? What
Yeah.
did they do? Try and help them notice what is unique about those people. And again, just biographies, biographies, biographies.
Yeah, be able to ask the like good follow-up questions to
Yeah.
get them to like foster that interest in,
Yes.
learning about whatever that subject is
Yeah.
that they want to go into.
Yeah. Because
Uh,
they're not even realizing that they're not developing that interest. Because, like, again, they have to have those three facts to share on the test. So they're like, okay,
yes.
got it. Phew, on to the next. And sort of like, in the name of optimization and efficiency, they're not even realizing that they
Yeah.
haven't had a chance to explore it.
I always think about that in terms of like, a big thing that I've realized, and I've talked about it with, some other friends offline, is like, the idea of show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome from
Yeah.
it. And something that's like, specifically for me is like the way our food is produced.
Mhm.
You show me what we're subsidizing and I'll show you the downstream effects of
Nice, yeah.
that, what comes in. You see a lot of sugars and everything, and that's going to be a headline because we subsidize sugar production.
Yeah.
But I think like tying it in with like grades and everything, like
Yeah.
you're hitting on a really important point, that it's like, kid come home, like, congratulations, you got the A, but like,
Right.
I'm
What'd you
actually
learn?
more interested in like what you learned, what you're
Yeah.
passionate about. And like, putting that perspective on it,
Yeah.
for someone who came from a family that was like, thankfully my parents and grandparents weren't like too pressure about grades.
Mhm, mhm.
I also, was very efficient in figuring out, oh, what's the like minimum viable
That's
product I
right.
need to
Right.
get
How do I
an
hack
A
this?
or
Yeah, and believe me,
I
my
mean,
daughter's the same way. She's like, "I know
yeah.
exactly what I need to do to get that grade." And I'm
I,
like, "But what are you learning?"
yeah, my best story that I
Yeah.
love to tell is like, my mom made a deal with me in junior year of high school
Mhm.
because, I was just like I was always a grade ahead in math. It worked.
Came too
My
easily to you.
logic,
Yeah.
come from a family of engineers.
Mhm.
And like so, going to junior year and she's like, okay, if you get an A or B this year, you don't have to do math senior year. You can do whatever you want,
Oh my
which
gosh.
worked out great because I got to, spend more time in drama class and
Oh, how
like,
fun. Yeah.
have more free time to be
Yeah.
creative. And so, but the program that I was using was through my online schooling,
Right.
and it basically, it measured, different subjects that you hit. And so within the first, trimester of junior year, I was in on our campus like every week talking to my math teacher,
Yeah.
going through all the details of like the hardest levels of what that
He was
year
probably so
required.
excited. Yeah.
Very excited
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah.
But then it was funny because 3 weeks later, I come in and I'm at, 85% of math.
Right.
And my math teacher looks at me and she goes, Brandon, you're at 85%. She's like, most kids in this school will never get to 80%.
Right.
As far as I'm concerned, you're done
You're
with math for
done.
this year.
Yeah, and I don't know what to
And so,
even do
yeah,
with you
and
anymore.
I don't know what to do with you.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, great.
Mhm.
So I took that as I'm done with math.
Right.
And so I just stopped logging in. And I laugh because at the end of the semester, it tells you how many days since you last logged
It
in.
was like
And it was like
220 days. Yeah.
220 days. But the program, I laugh because I would check it like every once in a while. I would, log in just to see what was going on.
Yeah.
Or no, actually, I would check my score on it. It didn't register that
Mhm.
I hadn't logged into math until literally like the
The
last week
last
of the
day.
semester. And so it was like A the entire year. And then the last week it started like dropping off my score because it
It's like
was,
F because
yep,
you have
yeah,
not
you're
shown up
nothing.
because it's a
But
program.
it's a program.
Yeah.
It doesn't know.
It doesn't
And
know.
so, but
Mhm.
it, to your point, it's like being able to like most people will hear that and go, "Oh, that's like not a great thing. Like you shouldn't be incentivizing people to
Right.
scam the system." But the reality is like most people don't realize that what they're teaching their kids to do today
Mhm.
is to find that minimum viable product to get the thing
Right.
that gets you to stop putting pressure on them
Yeah.
so they can go do the thing that they love.
Yeah, it's really well
And if
said.
you can like actually just incentivize the kids to be focused on the thing that they love and care
Yeah.
about, you're going to have a much better child. They're
Yeah.
probably not going to get in as much trouble
Yeah.
because you're
Well,
actually
they're
incentivizing.
engaged.
Yeah.
They're
I mean,
engaged. And I think like to your point about your teacher too, and I think that this is what we've discovered. It's like teachers don't become teachers to hand out standardized tests. Like
oh,
the
100%.
resources are there for your kids. They have teachers who love their subjects. So if like you can get your kids engaged, they have people to talk to about it, which is
Yeah.
like that is why they have teachers. So it's like use them. Like that is what we have seen with our kids. Like the teachers have just been so exceptional. But sometimes the that exchange has to happen outside a little bit of the regular. They have to get the work done first, essentially,
Yes.
right? They have to be able to check that off. Um, but I think incentivization is a really interesting topic, particularly with kids. That we have found, like our daughter broke a window like about a couple months ago. And,
Mm,
we always think about like, what are consequences,
yeah.
And so we told her, and I remember being like, oh gosh, that she was going to quote unquote pay for it. Now, of course, she
Yeah.
doesn't have the money to pay for it. But what we said was pick something you were interested in and you have to log a certain amount of hours in that topic. We're not going to
I
tell you
love
what
that.
it is. You have to pick it and you can pick two things, just
Yeah.
in case one of them you maybe just glommed onto too soon and you're not actually interested. And I can't even tell you the resistance we had from her. Like as though we were making her pay, like as
Yeah.
though she was really being punished in some way. And instead it was and she had just started playing in the band in 6th grade. So she picked, I'm gonna practice my oboe more for hours. And like each hour basically equated to a certain amount of money towards
Yeah.
the total goal. And I'm gonna write. She doesn't like to write, but she said, I'm gonna write a story. And again, the resistance was so intense. And now she's walking around playing her oboe. And now she's going up to her room and she's writing. And I don't necessarily recommend like
Yeah.
incentivizing children through a quote unquote consequence, but it changed. It was like the greatest thing that could have happened to her because I already saw that she was feeling overwhelmed by this instrument and that she was going to give up.
Yeah.
There was no question. And so it's like if there are just ways that you know your child best, and if you can figure out a way to give them the autonomy, and that can be really challenging as a parent because you have this idea from somewhere that you know what they should be focused on. If you can, like, check your ego in that way and let them pick it, you're gonna learn so much more about your kid too, and they're gonna learn about themselves, and they are gonna be engaged, and they're going to grow, and I think that feels very, very scary in the first steps, but the reward is pretty exceptional.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's amazing.
yeah,
That's a really phenomenal way, I think, to
yeah.
wrap up the whole conversation. I think we've hit on quite a lot today.
We did, we covered a
Um,
lot.
Thank you so much again for coming on, and I'm excited. Hopefully, we'll get to do this another time
Yeah,
soon.
I would love to. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Sweet.